You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to begin? Look no further. The team at Dodge Media Productions has 20 years of experience as podcast listeners and observing the industry and 8 years experience in podcast production. We can help you take your podcast from idea to fruition, and we'll make the process seamless and easy. We'll help you with everything from recording and editing to hitting the charts on Apple Podcasts. So what are you waiting for? Contact us today and let's get started. DodgeMediaProductions.com.
Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about Ella McCay. I think I'm saying that correctly. It's confusing though, because the actress who plays Ella McCay's name is Emma Mackey. Very similar letters, similar length.
Which somebody asked James L. Brooks if they changed it after they hired her, and he said, nope, it was always Ella McCay.
So did she have a leg up in auditioning because she already had the right initials?
I don't think so.
It's an interesting movie. So James L. Brooks is known for The Simpsons and other things.
Oh my God, so many things.
And I'll admit, this movie suffered from my expectations being very, very high. I liked it, but I think I had pretty high expectations going into it. And we've talked recently about a couple other films such as Eternity, where my expectations were low and I was pleasantly surprised. I wasn't disappointed in this film, but I think I had very high expectations. How did it land for you? Were you expecting a lot from it?
I was super excited to see it because we go to so many movies. We had watched this trailer so many times.
Yeah.
And so when you see names like Emma, who we knew from Sex Education on Netflix. I mean, anytime I see Jamie Lee Curtis, I get very excited because I adore her as an actor. Woody Harrelson, and then Kumail Nanjiani.
Kumail.
And then I also recognize Julie Kavner, which now that you say that, I understand why she's there, because James was responsible for The Simpsons, and so he knew Julie from The Simpsons. He co-created The Simpsons with Matt Groening. So anyway, all that powerhouse, I was super, super excited to see it. And the clips that were in the trailer made it look very, very funny. And I think what I appreciated from it, because the trailer obviously let us know that this poor dear is juggling a lot. And sometimes the handling of that can be like too much. Like, I don't know if it's like melodramatic or like too over the top. And I thought this hit a really good tone of, yes, she was dealing with a lot and she was juggling a lot, but I was so impressed by how intelligent James made her. She came off so incredibly polished, and almost like she even had this way where when she would get super overwhelmed, she would remove herself and take a minute and almost like get grounded or get strong again, and then she could go face whatever. So she wasn't like a flibbity gibbet, or she wasn't like ice cold. She would have moments where she would get overwhelmed, but she knew how to get herself, like her feet back under her. So I really, really liked. So I went in with, I don't know if high expectations, but I went in thinking I was going to see something, and I was super pleasantly surprised, and I love this movie.
Interesting, because from my perspective, it wasn't as funny as I was expecting it to be, but also part of that could be that it is a movie about a politician. And politics to me is not an inherently funny or enjoyable subject. And we've talked in the past about movies like Dave, where the character of Emma McCay, and now I'm going to struggle with that
Emma Mackey.
Ella McCay. Boy, they should have cast someone named like Emma Hockletooby in that role. Anyway, that character, I thought it was realistic that given her quirks and her inexperience, that she wouldn't be able to be a character like Kevin Kline in Dave, where they bring their wacky point of view in and they turn the establishment on its head and get all this stuff done. I think it was more realistic in that she didn't really have any leverage with the existing politicians. So you're not going to get a big sweeping, look, somebody can make everything right again. I thought it was realistic in that sense. Albert Brooks is one of my favorite actors. I like what he does, and I thought his character was also accurate in how he was portrayed. So to me, it was a little less comedic than I think I was expecting. I think that was where, and of course Kumail, I'm a big fan of Kumail, but his role was, I think, more sweet than funny, which is good for him. He obviously has range. But so I think that for me, I expected a little bit different. Maybe the trailers had some of the funny moments, and I love Jamie Lee's lines. She had some pretty good ones in there. Something like, please forgive me for what I'm about to say or do, or something like that. So that was all good stuff. Yeah, the people in there were great. I don't know exactly why there's like 1 out of 10 stars less than I was hoping for. Maybe my expectations were just too high for the film. It was a sweet film, not as silly as Welcome to Mooseport or another one of these political-based comedies, maybe not as peppy as Dave that I mentioned previously, but it was still, I thought, a positive and kind of uplifting film.
Yeah, I do wonder if the politics part got in the way for you because you have a certain level of disdain for anyone who you question anyone who even seeks any sort of political change. And I think that there are people who get involved in politics because that is a way to make change. And much like Ella's character, I think she did want to pursue politics, but once she almost got there, and she makes this ultimate kind of sacrifice for something that she's worked for like the greater good. Like, this is what we would love our politicians to be, is that they put their own aspirations and goals behind the change that they're trying to make. And so while being probably quite idealistic and maybe not as grounded in truth for what we see from our politicians, I like that Ella's character did the right thing instead of the self-promoting kind of thing.
Yeah, my concern with anybody involved in politics is that this is someone who is saying they want to make the choice of person A over person B. We don't have politics when there's plenty to go around. The only time politics gets involved is when there's a scarcity of resource, and ultimately it comes down to you have to pick one person over another person. I personally don't feel comfortable making that choice, and I worry about people who say, yeah, I totally want to do that. Brooks casts this in a very, I don't want to say Pollyanna, but in a very simplistic light, in that she wants a program for young mothers or small children or something, which is kind of like saying, I want to give out hugs to all the puppies in the world. Who's going to possibly oppose that? The crux of that in real life, though, is that you have to take from somewhere to give to some other place. That's the finite resources. They didn't really go into that here, but they did show, I think, effectively that the other politicians she dealt with were venal and self-serving at the very best, and perhaps even corrupt. I thought that was relatively accurate, and that's why I said I like the writing, because I think it shows realistically what happens when an idealistic person is encountering these people who are not as idealistic as her, who are playing the game much harder.
Yeah, they even portray, like, there's a couple of times while she does have this brief stint as the governor, that she's so idealistic and kind of so enthusiastic that there's not like one other person that matches her level of enthusiasm or energy.
Right.
Or desire to make the world a better place. Whereas I felt like the Albert Brooks character, obviously she looked up to him and he was an inspiration to her, so you would hope that he had some of that, but even he had some of the kind of cynicism and, oh, come on, just vote yes and let's move on kind of. And so he wasn't, I didn't think, drawn as optimistically as her character was.
I would agree. I think there's a tendency in movies to make the person who is the mentor better than her in a sense. And in this case, it's not. He isn't as idealistic. And to me, that raised the question of why his character would pick her character to be the running mate, the lieutenant governor. And maybe this is a by the premise, by the bit kind of thing. But that was, to me, an outstanding thing because you could see that they didn't agree on their levels of idealism, right? Albert Brooks's character, and he played it well, was, world weary in a sense. He was aware of how the game was played. And like you said, he just said, well, just kind of, go along with the way things are done and you can move on. I liked that her character did not compromise. She was going to stick to her guns no matter what. So the outcome of that is realistic, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. I wondered if part of what I was hoping for was maybe a little more action between her and Kumail's character, that there was not really a romantic subplot. I feel like it was hinted at.
I felt like it was hinted at. What did you feel about, I felt like at times the husband character was drawn a little mustache twirly.
I would agree.
A little too much on the evil side.
The husband, who is played by an actor whose name I always forget, but I have seen him in other stuff. Yes, he was over the top. I don't know if you'd say evil, but certainly so bad, shallow and self-obsessed. This is a case where I think it works for the joke maybe in this movie, but I think in terms of how do you get there? How would she possibly have gotten that far in politics if her husband is that much of an idiot in politics?
I thought they explained it that, did they meet in high school or college? Maybe it was college, because they showed us a couple scenes and she was talking to somebody and she said, was it the first time that somebody paid her attention, or the first time somebody, he loves me for who I am and he lets me, there was a scene where they did a flashback where they were in college and she explained it. Was it Jack Lowden?
Yes, Jack Lowden. But I was thinking that if he was that obsessed with himself, that would have caused problems earlier in her career. I feel like that actress can play quite young, so to me, I saw her as 21. I thought there was dialogue that established she was at least in her early 30s, which is probably accurate for the actress. But that was another thing I thought about, was this is a very young person for that job. Would you get there if your husband was a boat anchor and not helping out? I don't know, but that was a thing. I think you're right. I think he comes across as a little bit broadly drawn in his self-obsession and torpedoing of what she's trying to get done.
I just had trouble. And so I wondered, did James draw it a little bit more because to me, he could have been a Bellamy, but maybe we wouldn't have believed his arc, his storyline, that he would have gone from being Bellamy to, and maybe it was too little time to show it, because I do think there could be people that you don't recognize how much they might seek the spotlight until they're in the spotlight, and even
that's
a person.
That's a good point. Right.
Could maybe think I don't really care about fame or fortune. But then if you get it, you're like, ooh, I kind of like this. I want to keep this. I want to milk this for all I can. That could be a reaction. So it's possible maybe he didn't show that, especially if I don't think either one of them anticipated she would have that role because of how she came about it. She was just a lieutenant governor, and then because Albert Brooks's character got a cabinet seat, then she became the governor mid-term.
You might look at recently some, but for the most part, first ladies have not been activists. They have taken a back seat to their husband, and I would expect this would be very common in other roles than president, is the spouse, whether they be male or female, needs to take a step backward in the same way that in a Hollywood power couple, let's say, one actor kind of needs to have the spotlight and the other needs to be supporting it. It's hard for if two people are struggling. So that was where I was thinking, if he had that personality that would have manifested. But you're right, perhaps the difference was on her journey to lieutenant governor, she went through some boring accounting position and nobody paid any attention to him. So this is the first time he's getting any sort of spotlight. That I think makes a large degree of sense, that she kind of came up through perhaps a less famous route, and now he finds himself in the spotlight. Jamie Lee Curtis's character in general, when we see Jamie Lee in a trailer, we're in. We went and saw Freaky Friday or Freakier Friday or whatever the sequel is, pretty much based on her. I liked the sauciness, the spiciness of her character. It was nice that there was that connection of family, and as an auntie instead of a mother, I think she was able to maybe tell truth a little bit more, right? There's perhaps a different relationship there, more like a Yoda and less like a father or mother figure. That was nice. I thought it was really well done technically. The cinematography, the sound, no problems there at all. We did chuckle about some continuity with Albert Brooks standing in front of the crosswalk sign where it had the countdown numbers, and we joked about how the editor was frustrated. But the question we have, and again, anybody who worked on the film, feel free to send us a note as to how, but we thought that with Adobe Premiere and other tools, it would be relatively simple, since the camera was locked off on sticks, to mask out that part and just show the green walking sign or the red hand or something to get rid of the numbers. But I don't know if anybody but that weird guy in Oregon noticed that. I got a chuckle out of that. I liked how it was shot. I have no questions or no problems about the rest of that, despite a slight little continuity chuckle. The film was all in all well done. I don't have anything I can point at to say why I didn't like it as much as you, it seems like. I liked it fine, but I think you liked it a lot more than I did.
I really liked it.
So what was your favorite part then? Favorite aspect of the film?
Well, like I said, I think I really responded to sometimes, especially, because in a way this is a tiny bit fish out of water. Not exactly, because
oh yeah, I get it.
She definitely was trying. She went to college probably on like a poli-sci major, or I don't know if there's another major but probably like a political science type major.
Right.
It seemed like she definitely was in the running to either follow that path towards governorship, or maybe, governor and then senator, or I don't know, but she definitely seemed like, so I don't want to say like complete fish out of water like Dave, where he just happened to look like the president and so they pulled him into this role. But she definitely got it sooner than she would have anticipated. Sometimes when that's the case, kind of, I hate to keep jumping back to Dave, but there was kind of like a sweetness in his, there's a sweetness in his naivete of how the system works, which wouldn't be the case for Ella's character. Ella would know kind of how the game works, but she's so in love with wanting to make change and being part of the system and getting excited about these things that she didn't have that. So I appreciated that they portrayed her. Every time there was a conflict, like even with her dad, who is someone who has daddy issues, sometimes when that person comes back in your life, it can circumvent how your brain works, because your heart is leading and you have certain expectations and certain things you want them to say. And to me, I just always loved how eloquent she was in these really tough times. And I think I'm probably projecting here, because I find that when I get in a critical situation, my brain just kind of freezes, and it's, days later, I'm like, oh, why didn't I say that? Or why didn't I assert that? Or why didn't I bring up this point for my case? And so maybe that's what it was, is I just, as young as she was and all the different situations she was put in, I was always impressed how she, like I said, she would center herself and ground herself, and then she would come back and she could speak intelligently and eloquently and express what she needed. And I guess she wasn't, so I just loved Ella's character, I think, is what my favorite part. And I did appreciate the relationship with her and her aunt. And I loved how she would call her aunt for help, but she always ended up making her own decisions. So she didn't just do what the aunt said, but she had this anchor to, I need to bounce something off somebody. And then I thought it was a sweet relationship, her and her brother. And once again, it was she didn't completely come in and dictate what he needed to do, but she knew how to come in and support him in a way that was almost like what Jamie Lee's character did for her. Her aunt provided her with like maybe a little bit of stability or a ballast to kind of get her back on center, but then she could continue on. And I felt like she kind of did that to the brother. She didn't come in and completely take over and tell him what to do. She came in and just kind of helped give him a little bit of support and maybe a little bit of confidence, and then sent him on his way so he could go do what he needed to do. So I really appreciated all the different relationships. And like even Kumail, his character was in charge of her safety and her well-being, which he did, but it wasn't like he had to come in and save the day and tell her what to do. He was just there as like gentle encouragement and support. Yeah, I guess I liked all the relationships in the movie. I can't think of one part, because actually the one thing I was looking forward to in the movie from the trailer is the screaming scene.
Yeah.
And then that came so late in the movie, I actually had forgotten about it. And maybe because I saw it in so many different trailers, I was like, oh, that was kind of anticlimactic. Like,
yeah.
So I think I appreciated scenes earlier in the film, especially I think with the relationship between her and her aunt, probably. Jamie Lee's character, maybe.
I like the writing of her father, played by Woody Harrelson. I have to give credit to Mr. Harrelson because he allowed them to give him, whether it was prosthetic or not, horrible hair. It was this person who's losing their hair, but kind of half comb over, half just transient lifestyle. I mean, it was really, really bad hair. They made him look not good. I know he's a handsome fellow, so he gets the bravery for looking horrible award that Monster gave for Charlize Theron, right? Same kind of thing to me. I just was stunned that someone who's a leading man who's known for being handsome really didn't. But the character was despicable. I think that matched that character. And the part I like best about how they wrote that is there was no Hollywood reconciliation. That to me really is a great thing to do, to resist that temptation. And I may have, if I was writing that screenplay, I like the wrapping it up to everybody I think wants to have their parent turn the corner and love them the way that they wish they were loved. So there was that opportunity, I think, for the stereotypical Hollywood ending that they avoided. And the way it was done, I thought was very realistic, and it felt authentic to me. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you brought up the brother, because until you did, I had forgot about that character entirely. It took me a few seconds. Who's a brother? What? Huh? And that I find interesting. Is that arc kind of not critical to the rest of the story if I forgot all about it? Or did I not maybe respond to that character maybe in the same way? I don't know, but I had forgotten about that entire arc.
Until you said that, they got a pretty big name to play the brother's girlfriend, Io Adibri. Right. So I think what the brother brought to the movie, in addition to, the topic of mental health and kind of what people deal with and then what they're capable of, I think it was one more thing that Ella, from a very young age, started having to juggle. I mean, we see that as a teenager, 14, 16, she's dealing with her father's public infidelity, and then dealing with her managing her brother's needs and caretaking for him already. And I guess it's probably not unheard of that an older sister, especially, there had to have been like at least an 8 to 10 year age difference probably in the two of them. She was quite a bit older, at least it seemed. I'm sure that, and just stereotypically, maybe a girl that much older than a baby brother would feel like a second mother kind of thing and be kind of mothering. I don't know. But it was just one more thing I think that Ella was having to deal with on top of everything else. Her career, her husband, and then the brother, and then the father comes back. And so just it threw one more thing for her to have to deal with.
Right. I think if that was the role, then I would say, yeah, that served it appropriately, because he came across as needing some sort of care and feeding, some shepherding. But I agree with your earlier statement that I think it's good to show that people can have mental health struggles without being completely incapable of making their way in the world. You had mentioned the age of those two characters, and I thought the casting of, I believe her name is Rebecca Hall, as the mother, she also can play a very young character. So to me, there wasn't quite the age difference between Rebecca Hall and Emma McCay. I get it. They were a little close in age, and this happens a lot in Hollywood. And that's the thing that we kind of talk about is you cast the person that gives the best performance, that's available at the right time and has all the criteria. And that's one thing that when we were in theater, it doesn't matter as much, but because the film is so close, lots of close-ups, brings the audience right into the actors, they can see the actors in a way that you wouldn't when they're on stage. And so things like this, the ages, people would look at it. I had a costume person tell me that the costume helps more than anything to establish a character's age. So I don't follow clothes well enough to say whether the costume department did or didn't do that job, but it was one interesting thing when I first saw the Rebecca Hall character. I thought, is that an older sister? It wasn't immediately obvious that it was supposed to be a mom. And that was a little unfair though, because as I said, they really made Woody Harrelson, I think, look past middle age. So that was a little bit different. But is that to show that as a womanizer, he was constantly trying to get younger and younger wives? This is a thing where, not as a criticism, I just noticed this with the different actors, that age gap wasn't quite where maybe you would have thought.
So Rebecca Hall's 14 years older than Emma. I think, and I thought it was a little bit interesting that they made the choice to dress down Ella's character when she was playing like a 16-year-old instead of getting another actor.
Right.
Because now she's supposed to be like twice her age. So they kind of dressed her down and
a
changed her hair.
counterexample to that movie we've talked about recently on the podcast is a movie called Eternity, where in the main timeline we have Miles Teller and Elizabeth Olsen, but for when they're older, they didn't put them in the wacky makeup. They cast two different actors. I actually respect that. Yes, the actors didn't look exactly like the younger versions, but we established with dialogue, it makes sense. I think that's great. Sometimes it can go a little too much, especially when they try to take an older actor and youngify them with the CGI. So in this case, I thought it worked, but it was just a thing that I noticed that is difficult to do. I wish I knew more about clothing so I could have a more intelligent commentary about how you would go about doing those things. You can think with a gent, you can make him old by putting him in a cardigan, right? Or maybe you give him slip-on sneakers with the Velcro straps or something. There's probably some cues that you can do to make that work. In this case, I thought you could see, for example, Kumail still has a very strong jawline from when he was doing the Marvel movies. I think he's still kind of bulked up a little bit. But with those characters, that role, they have a uniform. So you have even less to kind of go with. So that would be curious. I would love to maybe, if we could find some costume designer who would be on the podcast. I'm very curious how they go about that process of identifying not just color palette, but also these other things like indicating characters' age and their socio-demographics. And this, one of the things you had mentioned was that the character of Ella kept getting overwhelmed as more and more was put on her plate. And it seemed like she was rocking like the lady dress shirt, and that lends itself to, as you know, if you roll up the sleeves or stuff gets untucked, and so that gives you some more options there to communicate that level. I didn't notice any specific details beyond that, but of course Albert Brooks' character as a career politician, he's always rocking the suit. Probably he had like the, you know, red or blue tie and maybe the flag lapel pin, the things that indicate this is a politician. Whereas then her character was, I think, dressed for the role, but definitely looked to be less like she didn't expect to be in front of cameras at a press conference. Mm-hmm. How did you feel about Julie Kavner's performance?
Well, at first, because I recognized her voice, I think the very first time we saw the trailer, I was like, "Oh, there's Marge Simpson." and then when I was reminded that James L. Brooks, in my favorite podcast, the DGA podcast, that he was part of The Simpsons, it's no surprise that she was there. And then there's a voiceover on a phone, and that's Tracy Ullman, which once again, some people get angry when filmmakers use the same crew or cast, and I find it very sweet because it shows kind of a loyalty to me, and also it's probably fun to work with your friends, and so when you can bring those people in. So anyway, I thought she did great. She was also kind of another pseudo auntie. I believe that we get exposition that she's been with Ella since she graduated college, I thought she even said.
Yeah, or maybe even before.
And so I think that's another thing that people, but maybe women tend to do it more than men. I would think that it's a human thing, is when we lose kind of a parent, I think we look for other kind of rudders or other people that can help, not replace, but help to fill that empty role that a parent maybe would have had in that void.
Yeah, I think all humans, regardless of gender, when you're young, need someone to use as a template or a model of how to go about life, because you kind of don't know, right? You're a young person, you don't have the experience. So I think that's pretty natural to look to others.
And to that end, I thought it was sweet how it was reciprocated. I felt like Julie's character definitely was looking out for Ella and even being protective of Ella, much like the aunt character of Jamie Lee Curtis's character, like that they were there to be on her side and make sure that if she put others' needs before hers, they were reminding her, make sure you take care of yourself, make sure you're looking out for yourself. Like she was a little suspicious of the husband, I believe, and she didn't
I'm curious
take
about
his nonsense.
How realistic it is that the spouse could be such a loose cannon. I don't know what you would do, but it would seem to me that the political machine would want to protect themselves from that kind of wacky behavior. So I didn't expect Julie Kavner's character to kneecap the guy, but I wonder if, let's say, this state's lieutenant governor's husband or wife went off the rails and started talking crazy. Is there some plan in place? How do we keep the press away from them? I think you could definitely say that James L. Brooks' opinion of the press is pretty low based on this film. They are portrayed as extremely aggressive, extremely shallow, and I guess you would say focused on exaggerating these things as much as possible. So not the best, I guess, depiction of, was it the Fifth Estate, whatever they're called. But
The fourth.
I really don't know whether that was realistic or not. We mentioned it before, that character was really over the top, really unhelpful, right? In a kind of way that really makes you question their relationship from the very start. And I think there's dialogue that talks about that, where she's maybe given him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, and he seems like from the very start to not be the kind of guy I would want to give the benefit of the doubt to.
Well, and I'm sorry I missed it because I do love this actress, but there was a character who played his mother, and she seemed equally as mustache. I had to leave the theater for a bit, and it was during her, like, kind of, it seemed like she was headed into a monologue. So I kind of felt like, I know what she's going to say. I can dash out really quick for this. So I don't know, you would have to tell me, but it seemed like she was equally wanting to use Ella's new position for their own family's benefit. They owned a pizza parlor, and it seemed like she was advocating for how can her being the governor help us as pizza owners. Was that the case or no?
I don't remember that specifically. I do remember in that scene they portray his father as being very henpecked. And she treated him with a lack of respect that she was also treating Ella. So that character was very hard and self-centered in a bad kind of way.
So she wasn't telling the son, you've got to do this, and you've got to do this, and you've got to...
She was pretty bossy, I think, too, to the son as well.
Oh, okay.
But it came across more to me as that's who she was as a person. And I believe that near the end of the film, Jamie Lee gives them a little bit of comeuppance through some shenanigans of their own, which is probably also relatively realistic. So this is, again, a film that just doesn't really exist in the same kind of genre as The Simpsons. I think it's important for people to think it's not a broad comedy in that sense. I think it probably is still considered a comedy, but it is on the line to drama, because I think it's also about this character, Ella's response to a surprising, extremely stressful situation in her life in the course of a few days. Massive upheaval, right? Massive tumult and change. And in that sense, I think it's a film about a person responding to that and how you cope with that.
But I think if you look at James L. Brooks's oeuvre, like he wrote Broadcast News, As Good as It Gets, Terms of Endearment, Spanglish. So those are all, I wouldn't call those broad comedies either. They have comedic moments, but a lot of those are dramas, very dramatic films. And so I think that to pigeonhole him as just the Simpsons guy, and then like the TV writing he did. So I think he isn't just the Simpsons guy and kind of doing this silly comedy. He does very well with like kind of life. Life has dramatic moments and it has silly, funny moments. And I thought that's what this film did so beautifully, is there were serious issues, but then there was this comic relief. Like it was, we've talked about before, like the rhythm and stuff, and knowing when your audience needs a little bit of a tension break. And it's kind of funny because the scene with the screaming with her and her aunt is kind of that in itself. It's a way to break some tension and just kind of get the craziness of life out of us so that we don't bottle it up and go, wacky, because we're trying to keep it all together. That sometimes when you are overwhelmed and struggling with all this stuff, sometimes the best thing to do is, from one of my favorite films, Summer School, Tension Breaker had to be done. You just do the rebel yell.
I think it's probably closer in tone to Broadcast News than Terms of Endearment in my book.
But even Terms of Endearment had some very funny moments.
He hasn't done a film for a while, and that's why I brought up not to expect The Simpsons, because I'm afraid, unfortunately, that was when I saw James L. Brooks. I think I just assumed that it would be more of that. But I think you're right. It's closer to something like a Broadcast News or As Good as It Gets, which is not at all a criticism, just mentioning for the listeners. Now, I do know that some people have talked about spoilers, and so we tried not to be really overt with our spoilers here.
Yeah,
but I would say if you're thinking about going to see this film, that would be a thing to expect. I think it's a good film. I did like it. I'm curious if I watched it again with different expectations now, if I would respond differently to the film, if I would end up liking more. And this feels like one of those films I probably would like more when I watched it a second time. Any final thoughts about Emma McCay?
Nope.
Ella McCay.
Ella
there we
McCay,
go.
portrayed by Emma Mackey.
Yes.
No, I really enjoyed it, and it was a good movie to just have a nice movie during this time. It wasn't a holiday movie, but it very well could have been set at Christmas, where it's not the main theme. But anyway, although maybe they wouldn't have worked so much if it was Christmas. But anyway, yeah, I liked it a lot, and go enjoy, or when it comes out on streaming, make sure you check it out.
And remember, Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.